Okay, now we can launch. Thank you everyone for being here today for our new latest video series, Artist to Artist Talks. We're very excited to add this to our video repertoire, which we've been so enjoying doing. If you haven't checked out our YouTube channel, Walker Fine Art, then please do. You'll see all the video that we've released over the past year. And today we walk into sunshine in Colorado. It's a beautiful, beautiful day, and it's the closing day of this exhibition. So we are happy to present this series, which is a series where our artists submit questions that they want to ask of each other in this panel discussion. And then we divvy them up and present the programming to you. Before we launch off, I have to thank, I have the opportunity to thank Miss Eliza Ross for all of the work that she's done on the technical and back end side of the planning of the programming, and also Libby Garon in creating what is, I think, wonderful, thoughtful content with the help of our artists. And we hope that you'll enjoy this series moving forward. We're going to be doing it once during the term of every exhibition. And our next exhibition opens up next Friday night, March the 12th, in which it will be one last limited attendance opening before the world opens up to the masses. So we'll have 20 people per time slot. Please sign up online if you haven't already, and we look forward to seeing you for that. So now I'm going to turn the programming over to Libby Garon, who is our gallery manager director, and she will be our moderator today. Take it away, Libby.
All right, a little bit of musical chairs. Hi, everyone. I'm Libby Garon. I'm gonna go ahead and plug in my headphones here, so hold on just a second. So those of you who have been lucky enough to see this beautiful exhibition in person, thank you so much for coming to the gallery. But for those who are participants watching the webinar today, I'm going to go ahead and read the exhibit statement so everyone kind of has a framework in which we're having this discussion. And then I'm going to toss it over to our amazing artists that put together so many thoughtful questions. I think we have such a treat in store for the next hour. So Upon Closer Reflection features Eileen Rosina, Brian Leister, Angela Beloian, Chloe Hedden, Brian Comer, and Jane Fulton Alt. In our first exhibition of 2021, Upon Closer Reflection, each artist focuses on light and energy through their floral and still life imagery. This traditional subject matter is viewed under a contemporary lens through oil painting, traditional and cyanotype photography, illustration, watercolor, and augmented reality. As we enter into a new year, we cast a light back in reflection of our own lives for contemplation and insight. We also consider the bigger picture to which we all belong. This is where the artists step in to bring inspiration and beauty to our community. So I think we can all agree that we have more time on our hands than we're used to. And these 6 artists really remind us to look closely and reflect and find beauty everywhere. So like I said, we have a treat in store, and I will not delay any longer. I'd like to jump into some questions. So the first section of our talk is going to be more process-oriented questions, and then later we're going to kind of jump into more concept and intention. So we're kind of keeping it surface level initially and then diving deeper. So I'd love to kind of toss it over to Angela, who had a question for Brian Leister. I also want to remind everyone we have 2 Brians on this call, so be sure when addressing the Brians, please use their last name as well. So Angela, I'm going to let you kind of ask Brian Leister your question. Brian's working with traditional oil painting and digital art, so there's lots of interesting discussion there. So Angela, take it away.
Thank you, Libby. Brian, your work is fabulous. And I remember talking with you at the opening, and I think you shared with me, correct me if I'm wrong, but that you were a painter before doing exploration with new technology. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm curious, I love that you have challenged yourself in learning something so radically different from painting, and how you have found a connection between those two, created artwork that uses both media. And I'm curious how, after you had spent time with new technology and virtual reality, and then you returned to painting, how that the new technology had influenced and changed you as a painter. If you found that that happened for you, and in what ways?
That's a really great question, by the way. So I definitely started out more of a traditional painter as an illustrator in particular, and really got into the computer because I needed photographic references, and I'd start building things on the computer. And so I always kind of blended the two processes, my painting and the technology. And I explore the new technology in the way that with my painting, I would explore a new medium, different types of surfaces, mediums, things that I just find interesting and want to try a different technique. I'd read about Botticelli would do green underpainting. So the next illustration, I would do a green underpainting to see how that worked. And so I kind of jump into new technology because I'm interested in it. In terms of, I would say my painting has more of an influence when I'm making things than the other way around. Like I feel like the techniques that I use or learn from painting in terms of lighting and shade and foreground, background, I'm always conscious of trying to have that happen in the computer space, like VR, AR. So I think it's a little bit of a bounce back and forth. And I think the common thread in some ways is when I was painting my early work, is all illusionistic and trying to bring something to life that didn't exist. And so when AR started becoming possible, it's exactly what I used to always want to do with my artwork, like create this window of impossible things in the world. So I just jumped in it right away to see how it would work.
Well,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for sharing that. I think that's what makes your apps and your digital art so tangible, I think, and accessible, I think, for so many different viewers, is that it really is rooted in your art making too, and there's that communication between both. So kind of continuing upon this idea of these 6 artists really making choices about kind of what they're trying to get the viewer to really look at and see, I want to ask Brian Comer has a question for Chloe Hedden. So I'd like to toss it over to Brian Comer.
Yeah, well, with Chloe's work, which of course I think is very striking, immediately you see it at a distance. But what I love about work that draws you in, and once it draws you in, it takes on a completely different environment. And so what strikes me about these pieces is that you close in on the subject matter, which to me is incredibly difficult to carry off. If you were to back off and do the flower or any subject matter as a complete thing, that would be wonderful. But to close in on the imagery and to make it work, to become almost abstract, it becomes a universe unto itself. That's a very difficult thing to do, and do it successfully. So I'd like to know what made you decide to close in on your subject matter like that, because that is, again, not an easy thing to do.
Well, it's a good question, Brian. Thank you for asking. It's been a long process of coming to this. So in art school, I started out, painting still lifes and including backgrounds and learning from, Renaissance painting techniques and all that sort of thing. And slowly over the years, I've realized that the parts that I want to paint are more sort of tactile patterns, textures, and I don't really want to paint backgrounds. So I started zooming in. I also am obsessed with flowers. I have been since I was a little girl. I used to make whole worlds out of flowers in the garden. I'd like string them together and make creatures out of them and stuff. So I have always loved flowers. And when I started painting a lot in college, I had an incredible painting teacher who said, painting realism is painting the poetry of light falling across forms. And so for me, that has been sort of, I don't know, a mission statement all these years. Is like, okay, light should be poetry. If it's feeling unpoetic, you're missing something, you know, there has to be something transcendent going on here. And so finding that poetry in the light, and it doesn't mean that it's, you know, one particular type of lighting, it can be any light. So I'm capturing that light, but I'm also wanting that intimacy with the subject. I want to be close to it. I want that abstraction. I want that texture. And as far as pulling off compositions, when you get close to something, I don't know, it's just years and years of practice and looking at things and knowing what makes a good composition and what doesn't. You know, thousands of hours of critiques in art school where you have to decide within 10 seconds whether something's working or not and be able to describe why or why not. So yeah, it's just a lot of doing that. I would say there's probably at least 10,000 hours of painting flowers and painting close in. So they're, you know, not every painting is incredible, but every once in a while I get lucky and it all comes together. So
I think we all share that in common.
Yeah.
That's a big factor in everything we all do.
Right.
right.
And underscoring that just like anything, artwork is a practice, and it's not just like, you know, intuition strikes and all of a sudden you make something beautiful. It's also the skill that you acquire over time. So Ryan Comer, you provided two really excellent questions. So I'm going to toss it back to you to ask Angela a question, and I wanted you to extend that to her.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Thank you. Angela, you, first of all, I love showing next to you. And I think our work plays incredibly well side by side because we're taking a organic form and we're really pushing it. But what I really got to know about your work, because I've spent so long looking at it after you hung it, is that I just love how you delineate the space. And again, not an easy thing to do because you're breaking it up into patterns. And that, again, it blows me away. And you're using fairly analogous colors, but it still has a real sense of space and dimension. So when you do these, and I was over listening to you describe your technique, you were talking to somebody else. I was kind of eavesdropping, I admit it. And you take the marker and you draw these things, and I'm like, wow. So my question is, when you come up with these designs, do you have prototypes? I mean, you really make these things look so flawless, so perfect. But again, I think there's hours and hours of trial and error to get those relationships to work. So are you doing a lot of trial and error type things before you get that right formula?
Thank you. That's oh wow, I love that question because it can be taken in so many different directions. These are contour drawings, and I begin with several photographs that I take. I, like Chloe, love flowers. I love plants. I love being outside, and I take a lot of photographs. And then I have files of them, and I'll find one that is captivating to me in a moment. And I will sometimes zoom in on it and start to draw it. And the thing with these markers is they're paint pens, you can't erase. So you kind of have to just go with it. And when I'm looking at the plants, I have a scientific brain too. I studied engineering for a number of years before I changed to my art major. So I'm fascinated with science and the environment, the way things grow. And when I'm looking at these plants, I'm noticing the uniqueness of them and trying to imagine the way they grew. And as I'm drawing, trying to really embody and emulate that growth. And so they having the photograph really helps me because I can see the dimensionality that you're talking about, the way a leaf isn't always seen directly head on, and the way it changes shape from different perspectives, that's in the photographs that I take. And so I'm really using that information as I'm drawing. But with a contour drawing, you just go with it and you start really exploring the shapes. And you said something about perfection or exactitude. I can't remember the word you used, but what I really am trying to embrace in this is the imperfection, because I find the irregularities of the leaves where there might be a chunk out of it, or it's been affected by the environment in some way, or one's larger than another. Those little imperfections to me are glorious. And I'm trying to capture all those little imperfections because that's where the personality lies in the plant.
You carry it off really well. I think what I meant by perfection was not that the images are perfect, but you're carrying it off as a piece of art is very successful. Like I'm looking at one of your images right in front of me, where you have these beautiful green leaves, and then you have that almost lavender purple right next to it. And of course, in terms of color, they play off each other just dynamically. It's like it's on fire.
Oh, thank you.
You know, and that's a beautiful thing. And Chloe does that too with her color. You know, it's like if you squint your eyes, these become not flowers, they become alive.
Wow,
So
thank you.
that's what I see as perfection.
I feel like when I'm creating this work, for me, it's a dialogue with nature. So I'm looking at the plant and letting it tell me what to draw, and also the mistakes that, like, quote, mistakes that I make as I'm drawing.
Right.
Embracing that and recognizing that's nature as well, and figuring out how to balance intellect and what I know and what the science part of my brain is saying with the intuitive component, and letting those both play a role in the work.
Thank you so much, Angela. I think that I'd love to toss it over to Jane Fulton Alt, who has a question for Eileen. And once again, we're kind of talking about, you know, why artists choose what to look at and what to make the viewer look at. So Eileen, when you answer Jane's question, will you also give a bit of an overview of what a cyanotype is for those who might not know? So take it away, Jane.
Okay. Eileen, I just wanted to say how much I love your work. It's mesmerizing. And I think I saw a video of you talking with all of these different plants from your own garden that you were using in your work, and it was that was mesmerizing too, because I've just taken up gardening. But I'm wondering how you decide what shapes you want to use in creating these forms, and how many different exposures you make for each piece. I was really curious about the process of it.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I work with cyanotypes, and I'll just really briefly discuss like what that is. So it's an alternative photographic process that uses two chemicals mixed together, which become then light sensitive. And you know, you can do cyanotypes on paper, fabric, glass. Like, it's pretty versatile, and it's pretty inexpensive, and also pretty good for the environment considering alternative photographic processes. So that's one of the, those are some of the many reasons I'm drawn to this specific process. And, you know, the shape of this body of work was really specific. You know, I'm working with a circle, and I'm working with that shape because of what it's what the whole inspiration for this project has come from these kind of analog computer devices called volvos. These date back to like the 15th century. And, you know, this is like really, really early astronomy for kind of calculating like our placement in the cosmos, you know, and also just like lunar movement, a whole bunch of different things. But these traditionally would actually turn. So that's kind of like my next goal, is to actually like maybe animate or maybe make these pieces so that the individual rings can turn and kind of become like a prediction device. So, you know, that shape was kind of the influence behind this whole body of work. And then as far as how many exposure, you know, how many different exposures, it's one ring is 1 day exposure. So, you know, sometimes it's like 8 different exposures, sometimes it's a lot more. Like I think I have like up to like 16 really, really small rings, and the quality of the blue is reflective of what kind of day it was. So if it was a cloudy, kind of overcast day, you know, you get a light blue. And then the really strong, dark, deep blues were really, really sunny days. And during this time, I was also dealing with like a lot of the forest fires when I was making this earlier in the fall too. So it's kind of an interesting like thing that was tossed in there. And I'm, you know, I always work outside with the sun and the elements. And so this is all really subject to weather, but it's kind of like a calendar of what the days were that during this period that I was making them.
Just beautiful. I love them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eileen. Yeah, I think I love that the inspiration of such contemporary work can be rooted in this kind of antique science or the antiquity around old astrologers. And kind of thinking about antiquity, Angela has a question for Jane and her relationship with her work and the Dutch masters. So Angela, go ahead.
Jane, I love your photographs. I think they're luscious and they just draw me in. The lighting is gorgeous. And when I look at your work and think about the Dutch master still life paintings, thinking about probably the time of year in which they painted, that they had access to flowers and those northern winters, and they weren't having flowers shipped from down south in those years. And thinking about your work and the fact that we have such a variety of flowers and fruits at our fingertips now, what helps you choose? Is it intellectual decisions? Are they emotional decisions? Are they circumstantial? How do you choose your subject?
Great question. I don't really choose the subject. I feel like the subject chooses me. And that's really been the case throughout my whole photographic career. I think it was 2 springs ago, I was at Trader Joe's and they had ranunculus, and I ended up buying them out. I just fell in love with them. And I came home and I started photographing them in my kitchen window very early in a spring morning. And you know, I just responded to them, and one thing led to another thing, and then I started auditioning other fruits or vegetables in with the work. And I have to say that this body of work is really a continuation of my response to what was going on in our country and worldwide since, when was it, November 16th or November in 2016. And I really was just looking for beauty and light. And that's what was pulling me in. And so that's how this body of work came about. And I think someone else asked me about the other flowers, the peonies, and honestly, I got those for Mother's Day. And I just was blown away by them. And so then I just kept working with them from the moment I opened up the box until the last blossom died. So
They're gorgeous.
thank you.
Sorry, technical issues. So speaking of beauty and light, I'd love for Chloe to ask her question to Angela.
So Angela, these pieces are so beautiful, and I can tell that you loved making them. Just the process looks really soothing and meditative and peaceful. Do you usually work outside while you're drawing, or do you prefer to work in the studio? And do you have a favorite plant that you love to draw?
I love this question because it also I can take it in some different directions. The part about the work that I love making it, I do, and there's another edge to it that when I'm starting, because I can't erase the paint pen, I'm often terrified. Terrified's too strong of a word. I'm intimidated, and I feel like I set up a challenge for myself that I have to psychologically overcome. And so it feels kind of like jumping into a cold swimming pool, that if I ease into it, it's going to be worse than if I just jump, and I have to psych myself up and just push myself to go. And when I'm drawing these figures, that anxiety, I need to kind of nurture myself. And so my environment, I need like a safe space to do this. And if it's a nice day outside, I love being outside. I love moving my easel outdoors and listening to the birds and being in my yard. If it's windy or cold, I want to be in a place where I'm more comfortable. So I'll work in my studio. So I move around depending on where I feel maybe the safest. And then once I get that outline done and I'm feeling more confident with the composition, the lines around the botanical image, I actually do relax, and that does become meditative and repetitive and more soothing. So it's a calmer state to be in, and I can be outdoors or indoors when I'm doing that. And regarding the favorite plant question, I have lots of favorite plants, but not necessarily ones that reappear in my work because I get bored easily. And so once I've drawn a plant, I tend to be curious about other forms and other shapes. So I jump around quite a bit, and occasionally I'll repeat, but there has to be something new in it for me.
Well, maybe it's that the tension between the peacefulness of the sort of outer lines and then the stress of those first drawings that creates part of the vibration that you can really feel in your work. It's just they feel alive.
Thank you.
Oh, I love that, Chloe. Yeah, I do think that they kind of vibrate and they have this, it's like you're drawing their energy or their vibe, and they have a spontaneity to them when you're really up close to them in person, but from far away, they're very graphically strong and detailed. So I'd love to toss it over to Eileen. She has a question for Jane in regard to composition.
Hi, Jade. So, wow, your work was just like so striking to me, and in so many different ways. There's so many different facets to it that I'm really drawn to. But specifically, I was curious about how you approach the compositions in your work, and how do you kind of curate, like, all of these things that you're trying to balance in the photo, like the form, the color, the texture. Do you draw? Do you work? Do you plan in advance? Do you work intuitively in the moment? All of the above. I'd love for you to tell us more about your process.
I wish I could say that I had these notebooks that had all these ideas in them, but I don't. I work pretty intuitively, and I try things out. And as you know, as an artist, a lot of times, most of the time, it doesn't work out. I guess with this series, I started bringing out, my mother had passed away. There's another artist who's been dealing with a lot of loss, and my mother had passed away, and I started bringing out some of the silver, and so that had a resonance with me. But it's really trial by error, and I work from the inside out. It's kind of like if my gut, my heart, if it tells me to go in this direction, that's what I do. That's it.
Thank you, Jane. Well,
And-
speaking,
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
just this was sort of this was begun about 2 years ago, and I've been actually moving into doing more not informal, but more work with within a garden as opposed to these formal still lifes.
Oh, we can't wait to see those. So speaking of kind of working from the inside out, I love what you said, Jane. We're going to kind of be switching. We're right at the halfway point. So good job, everyone. We're on track. Kind of going more into the intention and concept behind the work. So again, Eileen, will you please extend your question to Brian Leister regarding the ambiguous relationship between reality and simulated reality? So I'm very excited about this question. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, Brian, you're just brilliant. I love the way you work and, the way you think about your work and the concepts behind it. So I'm just going to read the question that I had written just because it's a little bit wordy. So your work has me interrogating the idea of the unstable and ambiguous relationship between reality and the simulated as existing somewhere between true and false. What is the role of imagination in a technologically saturated world for yourself and for the viewer? And furthermore, if you could expand on how is working with technology grounding you in reality?
Oh, that's a very good question. So I think throughout almost all of my work, I'm very interested in blurring that line of what's real or what's not real. And I think that at times, I guess coming from a background of kind of traditional, but also digital, there's a tension between the two media that I kind of feel exists. And I guess I like the idea of confusing that tension, like it's not real or it's not fake or digital, because some of the things that happen digitally have profound effects on everybody in society. And you could say it didn't really happen if it was a text or a tweet or, something like that. But it's like I guess I'm interested in that fact that the things we can do digitally just are amazing in terms of technology, but also powerful almost as much as anything that you could experience in real life. So I am kind of trying to find that tension between the two and explore it and kind of think of it as a medium. So in this particular body of work, I was wanting it to feel like they could each exist sort of on their own, and in a way be sort of like a hidden, like an Easter egg or a present that's existing in the painting. And if you don't know it's there, you would never see it, but somebody might come along and show you, oh, by the way, if you point the image of the painting, this other thing happens. So for me, I thought this particular thing, I wanted to be a pleasant experience, that it was something of kind of nice and kind of like almost like a cherry on top of what they're seeing physically.
And for those who haven't seen the exhibition in person, the simulated kind of digital pieces that are coming out of the paper paintings, the paper still life paintings, you see through an app on an iPad or a phone. So these are screenshots that we took while using our phones to showcase the second component of Brian's already incredibly skilled paintings.
And I guess in relation to that idea of reality, they really change a lot based on how close you are to them, to again, trying to bring the physical body into the digital space. So when you're distant, they're not making sounds, they're not animating as much. And as you approach it, it's like they're responding to your presence. So and then if you can, when I showed it to my wife in the early stages, she immediately wanted to touch it. And that prompted me, I need to make sure that it does something when you touch it, again, to kind of blur that space.
Thank you, Brian. We've been so enjoying showcasing this work. People have just been responding to it really, really well. So kind of shifting over to more of a traditional process, I guess, but done in a very contemporary way. Chloe Hedden, I'd love for you to ask your question to Brian Comer.
So, Brian, did working with only Black for this series help you to process the difficulty of 2020? Was it like therapy or shadow work? And at this point, are you eager to return to using color, or has Black opened up a new world that you want to continue to explore?
That's a good question. To answer the first part of it, yes. With what was going on, did I go into, depression, malaise? Of course I did. And did it stir me in that direction? Yes, but also you have to know too that I come from a printmaking background. I also do etchings, and I still do. I still love to do them, and they're predominantly black and white. So in a way, it was me returning to my roots as well. That because watercolor is still a new medium for me. I'm still learning. I've always loved it, but I've always been afraid to do it because, as you all know, you really can't go back into it, and my philosophy in doing them is something I really can't say it on this this cast right now because I use a lot of expletives in the process of doing it. So we'll table that for another day. But the thing is, since you can't go back into it, there's got to be that, as Angela said, you just got to live in the moment and go for it. But also when you use watercolor, when I started doing it, the first thing I wanted to do was like a kid with a new toy. You wanted to use all the colors you possibly could use. And it was exciting because the colors are vibrant, you get some beautiful things. So I look at the black and white as actually a progression because it's more with less. And I think when you realize what black can do on its own, it has a really strong dynamic quality to it that I'm really liking. So I'm probably going to continue to use black, but that being said, I'm also going to go back to using color again too, especially what you've done, which I have to say also inspired me a bit. I was like, wow, yeah, that's why I love color, so it's going to be a bit of both. It depends on where my mood in, what's the subject matter. So it's a little bit of all of the above.
Lovely. Yeah, I don't think black has completely gone out of any of our palettes yet. There's still a little 2020
it really
feeling.
No, it really is. I mean, black is beautiful. Let's face it. There's a strength to just doing that. And let me tell you too, maybe you all concur with this. I think just using one color is sometimes more difficult.
Oh yeah.
Because we have a fear of, we learn that we have a fear of open space psychologically. So that alone is tough to utilize a lot of negative space, but that also applies to using one color because our brain is saying, well, wait a minute, come on, let's bring more into this. So to walk away, it's not so easy sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I think, Brian, somehow you're able to, you spoke about this in your artist statement, but somehow you're able to push black so far. I mean, there's so much subtlety in this work. So anybody that can scoot down here today to see these, they're really incredible. There's just a huge range of what we consider to be black. So going back to kind of talking about color, I'd love for Eileen to ask her question to Chloe in regard to this body of work.
Hi, Chloe. I know you spoke a little bit about this earlier, but as soon as I saw your work, I couldn't help but think of just the concept of intimacy. And I'd love if you could just expand upon what that word brings up for you with your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a huge part of what I'm working with. It's getting close, getting very close, almost uncomfortably close to my subject all the time, whether it's painting flowers or minerals. I want that nearness for whatever reason. I don't know, it appeals to my personality, I guess. But there's another aspect to it, which I think of, which, when you ask that question comes up for me. Just the technical aspect of the painting. So when you're far away from them, they're usually quite large, and I love painting big. I can't really paint under 36 by 36 inches. I mean, I can, but I don't enjoy it as much. I want them to be large. So when you step back, I did a painting once that was 12 feet across, and you really had to get like a full football field away from it to take it in. It was just enormous. But as you get closer and closer and closer, you realize that they're not photorealistic at all. They become much more abstract. The brushwork is actually pretty loose. So for me, I'm wanting like these layers of experience with the work where it's a different thing depending on how close you are. So there's, in that sense, I really am playing with intimacy. If you're right next to it, you'll see that I don't use any thinner whatsoever with my paint. It's just pure thick paint. And then I use, stiff bristle brushes. So the brush leaves an impression every single time I make a mark. And so I'm playing with the energy, the growth forms of the petal. Every single brushstroke has to trace that form. So there's a sensuality as well. But, you would think that flowers maybe would be this sort of soft, delicate, perfectly smoothed brushwork, but that's just not, I want there to be more tactile quality in the brushwork. So anyway, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. That was brilliant. Thank you so much.
And I think for those who have seen Chloe's pieces in person, they do have this incredible photorealism quality, but then up close, just like what you're describing, Chloe, they have an impasto style painting to them. And so there is this texture and a requirement of intimacy that the viewer really has to have with the work in order to see it fully and experience it.
I read this great. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm just going to move a little bit faster because I want to make sure everyone has a chance to talk, and then we have room for questions. So I might skip a question. So panelists, be aware. So Jane, I'd love for you to ask your question to Angela regarding the lines around the plants.
Sure. Angela, I was wondering what the significance of the multiple lines around the plants were for you.
A few years ago, I started using fire, building fires as a meditative practice. And I think it was Brian earlier that mentioned them being, the paintings looking like they're on fire. That's really interesting to me because fire, I have a history with fire, which is for another day. But I was building these fires and watching the wood burn completely to ash. And as I was doing this, I was noticing that every edge of the grain line in the wood would get this kind of silvery line. And I just found it so delicate and captivating that I started trying to recreate those silvery lines as a depiction of the release of energy, that everything that is alive or has been alive has this potential energy that comes from the sun, that when it burns, it's released. And so as I'm drawing these plants, I'm trying to also depict that internal energy that is in all living things. And those silvery lines from the fires are where they originally came from.
Angela, we need to talk after this is all over because I have a whole series I photographed fires for 10 years, and
Oh,
there's
I would love to talk.
there's a fire here, and I think we have a lot in common, so we'll talk
I
later.
think so as well. Thank you. Yes, I'd love that.
Wonderful. Oh, I love this. So Angela, I'm going to actually give you the floor to ask two more questions. You provided really wonderful questions.
Oh,
So
thank you.
will you please extend your question to Eileen about the repetition of botanic forms in her work?
Eileen, I love your work, and I am curious about how you see your work in the context of the floral motifs that are used throughout history, and if there's an era that you find captivating or more interesting than others, and if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Yes, thank you. You know, I don't know exactly if there's one specific era that influenced this body of work. Like in general, I'm really interested in like kind of 19th century naturalism, like the Age of Enlightenment, and kind of like a Baroque like quality, this kind of like excessive maximalist, you know, just use of the, not the canvas, but of the object that I'm printing. And, you know, I'm not exactly, sure beyond that, you know, but that kind of is influenced, or that influences me just because of the preservation quality, I guess, of like me wanting to, you know, kind of like halt these processes. So I press the flowers, which kind of also like goes back to like these like, you know, like 17th, 18th, 19th century tendencies, and to extend the life of a flower, to understand it more. But beyond that, you know, I'm not sure. I work really just like from my gut as well. I wasn't like influenced by a specific culture, but now, you know, I feel like I'm going to pay attention to different flower motifs that I see from that. Thank you.
Oh, well, I love the way you are choosing one form for each ring, and it's getting repeated. And it enhances that shape. It allows us to see the repetition of it and the patterns that are created when you put them side by side. So I think that that's a really rich history, and I think they're gorgeous.
Thank you, Angela. And thank you, Eileen. I know that also Eileen's harvesting them all from wherever her travels take her. So a piece of that puzzle is also kind of working with the limitations of what she has at her disposal, which I think is beautiful and connects us back to Colorado and being here. So Angela, you had another question for Brian Comer that I'd love for you to ask as well.
Brian, I want to repeat what you said earlier. I love our work side by side. I think that in this show, they really complement each other. And I love that you're just using one color right now. And what you said earlier about the challenges of that really resonates. And I'm curious about, as you've worked with just one color, and in printmaking, I could see this also as well. You have this really beautiful balance between representation and abstraction in your work. And I'm wondering how using one color if that has allowed you to explore abstraction more clearly, and how it has affected your use of negative space.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. That was very well said. Yes, the black has definitely allowed me to expand and make it more freeform and abstract it, which is where I've wanted to go anyway. Because as the watercolor or any medium, I have kind of a little bit of a dialogue going on with the paint, where you want to be, you have a subject matter that inspires you, but then you want it to go on its own direction. And I kind of let the process tell me what to do. So the beauty of watercolor, and one of the reasons I've always loved it, is because of the wash nature of the medium. And I think if you control it too much, you kill it. And you have to let it do its own thing. And by experimenting, and what Chloe said earlier, it's a lot of painting, doing a lot of pieces and a lot of failures to see what works and what doesn't work. And you start to develop a technique. And as these techniques start to bear fruit, the more I'm not looking at anything. So even if I may take a subject matter, like there are several pieces in this show that were inspired by sunflowers, I wasn't looking at sunflowers. I was my impression of what I think they should look like, but they're not really, I wasn't really looking at anything. So they are becoming more abstract, and I want to become more abstract with this because the medium really wants me to go in that direction. But I do want to bring color into it, and seeing what you all have done have definitely inspired me to do that more. Like when I see the colors that you're doing, it's like, yeah, God, I really love color. It's really cool. And so I do want to abstract these things more, but I do also want to get into color a little bit again. So I thank all of you. And, Jane's pieces. And if I may, on a quick note, there is a painting in the Metropolitan Museum of Art that's in the cafeteria, if you can believe it. And it's one of my favorite paintings in the entire museum. And it is a 18th century French still life of a bouquet of flowers. And I think it's one of the most beautiful, underrated paintings in the world. And Jane's work, I'm going off on a tangent here, but your work kind of reminds me of that painting. And I thank you for that, just on the side. So anyway, just a little side note there.
Thank you.
You belong in the Met, Jane.
Oh,
No, we all know it. Brian Leister, I know you had a question while we were talking to Brian that kind of popped up. It's in the chat. I think he may have kind of answered it, but I want to make sure you had a chance to ask your question from Brian Leister to Brian Cromer.
Yes, I was just wondering how drawing fits into your practice. Are you drawing these and planning out the compositions, or is it, the ink is kind of splashing and dripping and then you turn it into something?
It's both. It's a very loose concept. And I will do some pencil lines on some of them, not all of them, but it's very, like, literally a few lines, because I don't want it to interfere with what I want the painting to do. So yeah, I know that I want it to be this or that, but I really want the paint to be in control of that. So if I'm doing any drawing, it's real minimal. Because one of the things I discovered early when I started experimenting with watercolor is if you do a very strong underdrawing, it will show through the watercolor and you really can't eliminate it. So you really have to just let the paint do its thing and just draw with. What I end up doing is, I take the brush and I draw with water. So if I'm drawing an outline of, let's say, a particular flower, I'm going to draw that in just water and kind of look at it in a light so I can see kind of where the paper is wet. And then I just touch it with the paint. And the paint will fill in that drawing. Does that make any sense?
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm drawing. So in a sense, I am drawing, but I'm doing it with water, not with pencil. And I'm doing more and more of that, because whatever's wet is where the paint is going to go, and wherever it's dry, the paint will stop. It will not go there at all. So that's really my underdrawing, is just simple water.
It's very beautiful. I kind of felt like that was happening. It looked like the ink was drawing itself in a way.
Yeah, because the thing with watercolor, which I've loved all my life, and again, I'm just learning it now, really, is that if we go into it too much, if we pencil in or even and this is my own opinion, some people may differ from that. is that if we do too much, the beauty of the medium is lost. We lose what watercolor can do. And I learned from looking at especially the Zen master watercolors from Japan and China, which pretty much mastered the media in the 15th century. I will never top what they did. All I can do is try to be as good as they were, but they did it all 500 years ago. You know, as Picasso said, we've learned nothing. You know, we just hope to do homage to these people, and hopefully I can do them justice.
Well, I think you are, Brian. So thank you for sharing your work with us. They're just stunning. I mean, I just think that they have such a spontaneity to them that make them just like you're experiencing a moment with you in some way.
Thank you.
So I'd love the participants and attendees of our panel today to have a chance to ask their questions, but it doesn't look like we have any in the chat right now. So anybody watching, if you want to pop your question into the chat, we'll try to get to it. We just have about a minute left. And I kind of wanted to end on this note with Chloe and Eileen. Chloe had kind of an interesting question for Eileen. So while we wait for some questions to come in, I'd love for Chloe to extend her question to Eileen.
Eileen, so I just love this series and your work. And I find it to be pitch perfect in all the layers and its conception and creation, the way it all works together. It creates pieces that are interesting and full of depth to look at and think about. Forgive my ignorance in the process of making these. I've never worked with cyanotype, but would it be possible to make these under moonlight? Perhaps a very, very subtle, barely there version. I love the sun and working with sunlight too, but moonlight has this whole other quality since it's also sunlight, but in a reflected version. Maybe it would take a whole month of putting it out every night during the whole moon phase. I'm just wondering if that would even be possible or if you've tried it.
Thank you for your question. I think it's so thought-provoking and elegant to think about that. And that's honestly something it hadn't even crossed my mind. Because from what I understand about cyanotypes, you do need, a pretty strong UV light source, but, the idea of even putting it out over multiple nights and just experimenting with that reflective quality is so intriguing. And you better believe that I'll be out there the next full moon trying this exact thing. And if I'm successful, you will be the first person that I send a photo to, because I love that. Yeah, and it might set me off in a whole new direction. So,
well, I can't wait to see.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, all 6 of you. You are all fantastic, and you all made this such a rich and deep artist-to-artist talk. So I can't thank you all enough. And I think that hopefully you all got out of it as much as we wanted, with being able to really come together and talk about how your work relates and how it complements each other. So something that I just absolutely love about our exhibition program here is we're aesthetically curating, but we're also conceptually doing that. So you're always going to see an incredibly thoughtful thread and theme when you come to an exhibit at Walker. So let me see if there's one more. It looks like one question popped into the chat, and it's 2:01. For those who have to hop off, go ahead. But this question is from Tanya Bennell, one of our incredible artists. She has a question for Eileen. And she says, in addition to the calendars from antiquity or solar recording of the day's sunniness, when I saw these in person, I thought there was a connection to domestic handcraft, such as doilies or braided rugs. I was wondering if there is an interest and connection to domestic handiwork, which I thought was a great question. Eileen, do you have a chance to answer that?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for your interest and for coming to see the show in person. Yeah, I'm glad you could get up close to the works because there's a lot of detail that it's hard to capture on the camera. But yes, I thought especially the piece in the middle, I absolutely based that shape on like jelly roll, like braided rugs from my childhood that my grandma used to make. And that's a great parallel. But as far as like the connection to domestic handiwork, I think for me where that comes in is more of like my process of growing flowers and pressing them, and this kind of labor. It's very, very, very labor intensive. From the first flowers in March till the first frost. It's a daily kind of chore that I've integrated into my life, and so I think that it feels like the domestic handiwork like comes into my process, my practice with that process of collecting these flowers, which I then use to make these prints. But yeah, especially the one in the center, that was a very astute observation. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Eileen, and thank you, Tanya, for coming to see the show. She says, thank you and beautiful show, all of you. Congrats. So, well, I think with that, we're just a couple minutes over, but so thank you everyone for popping in, and thank you to our amazing artists. The show was just such a beautiful way to start 2021, to have florals and color and vibrancy in the gallery. And there's still 3 hours left to come see the show if for those who want to come on down. And otherwise, we have an opening celebrating Month of Photography, opening next Friday on March 12th. So come say hi if you can.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, thanks.